Welcome to the Worth Listening podcast, where we focus on having positive and productive conversations about money. Join your host, Lauren Williams, four-time Olympian turned financial planner, as her guests share their money stories. We aim to help you own your personal money story and feel good talking about it. Money is a tool that can help you live the life you want. You should feel comfortable listening, sharing, and communicating about it. Now, here's your host, Lauren Williams.
Welcome back to the Worth Listening podcast. I'm excited to have Sasha DiGiulian here to share her money memoir with us. Sasha is a professional rock climber that began climbing when she was just 6 years old. She has a long list of accomplishments, including winning world championships for female overall, 13 years undefeated as the Pan American champion, and 3-time U.S. national championship. Toughest sports climb achieved by a female? Yep, she has that title too. From the age of 12, she was balancing competitive rock climbing with school, something she did all the way through earning her college degree. There's no full rides for rock climbing, so Sasha will share how she handled her finances along the way. Let's jump in. Today we have a female badass on the show. And so usually we jump right in, but we've got to stop and break down. Sasha DiGiulian is a rock climber, not just any rock climber, the female overall world champion. We're going to talk a lot today about being in pro climbing and all about her money memoir. So Sasha, welcome to the show.
Hey, I'm so thankful to be here. Thanks for having me on it. I'm excited to delve right in.
Well, let's do it. Let's talk a little bit about rock climbing and how you get into it, because that is the beginning of your money story. You started rock climbing when you were 6 years old.
I did.
I don't think you don't like the climb, but like really climbing?
My brother had a birthday party at a climbing gym outside of Washington, D.C. called Sport Rock. I was 6 at the time. It was 1998. And I went with him and his friends who were all on his hockey team, and that was my first time ever trying the sport, which then was just like this hobby that I realized I really enjoyed. I joined the local junior team program that the gym had, and I started going about twice a week, so on Wednesdays and Saturdays. And then one Saturday morning, I walked into the gym for what I thought was going to be junior team practice. And like at the time, I was doing lots of different sports, specifically figure skating mainly, but also swimming and playing tennis. And I have grown up skiing because I'm half Canadian. But anyways, I literally stumbled upon the competitive realm of the sport. I walked in and there was a youth regional championships happening at the gym, and the organizers let me compete even though I hadn't done any of the qualifying rounds. So I couldn't progress on to the next competition if I did well, which I competed in the 11 and under category, and I won my category, and I guess the rest is kind of history from there. I started training, and I had a coach then, and I started getting into competitions the next year, and for the next over a decade, I competed from the youth national team to World Cups on the junior level to then being eligible because I was old enough to compete for the U.S. national team, and kind of grow my career that way.
That is so amazing. And so you said you kind of stumbled upon rock climbing. That's a lesson to the listeners that there's things that you don't see out there in life right now, but there's still opportunities that are available to you. You too can stumble upon rock climbing, figure skating, being an Olympic track and field athlete. You just got to be open, be ready, and be able to see those opportunities as they're coming to you. So I think it's a really cool story of how you got into rock climbing.
Yeah, totally. You never can really predict what the future looks like. You just have to be open to new adventures.
For sure. So let's stay in your childhood for a little while. What was your first memory of money?
I grew up in a family that money was never something that limited us, and that's something that is a privilege that I can recognize and be grateful for. But My dad's side of the family is Italian. They immigrated from northern Italy, and my mom is Canadian. She was a producer, and she moved from Toronto to Washington, D.C. when she was with my dad, and my brother was born in Canada, and I was born actually in D.C. I went to a high-end private school from kindergarten to 12th grade, and I was surrounded by, I think, a lot of wealth that became kind of the norm, and not in a pretentious way, just in the way that money wasn't ever a limiting factor, which I think I can look at as something that I apply to my life now, as whatever the cost is, you can make it happen. And I know that that's an optimistic perspective, but that was kind of what I grew up with. And I think that we weren't kings and queens of the city or anything like that, but I wasn't too aware of any sort of limitations. My dad was an entrepreneur, and he worked really hard. His business was essentially his life. I mean, he was there morally to support me in my climbing, and definitely my parents were the ones who enabled my early dreams to happen, because my mom would drive me around the country to get to where I needed to be for climbing, especially as my career kicked up. And she flew to France with me for my first international competition when I was 12. I think that money became more of a thing that was me trying to financially prove to myself and to my family that climbing could be my profession. When I started really having success with it, I had my first sponsor when I was 12, and it wasn't a monetary arrangement that was necessarily lucrative at all. It was basically sponsorships, and the income level of climbers is on this huge sliding scale from basically having product endorsements to making a lucrative profession. And obviously when I was 12, I was like at the very beginning stages, but I saw money more as an example that I was pursuing something that I loved and making it happen.
I think that is so amazing that you have such a good relationship with money and such an open relationship with money. You know, said despite it not being a limited factor in your life, I think often people don't have good relationships with money because they're not able to talk about it in a way that's open and free flowing. So I want to go back to your parents a little bit and discuss what impact they had, like I said, with money not being a limited factor. What values did they instill in you? What kind of goals, or, you know, were there limitations around money with allowance, or, you know, what did they teach you about money?
With regards to values, my parents instilled in me as the most important value that they really put at the forefront of my priorities was academics. Growing up, my education was the number one thing that money, no matter how much it costs, was going to afford. And I know that there were rough patches in my childhood, and there's definitely, with regards to just my dad making his business work, and also just personal instances where his family could argue over money, and that I guess we could get into later if we choose to dive down that route. But I think that them putting education as something that was so important really has lived on within me. And I think that I believe in education so much, because if you can really achieve the maximum capacity that you have in learning and growing and being open to experiences, then you aren't limiting yourself from progressing from a mental side, but then it also kind of trickles down into the physical side. So in school, if I didn't get good grades, then I couldn't miss chunks of school to go out and climbing. So that was kind of my motivation to keep my grades up, so that then my parents and my teachers could be supportive of my passion. So as I progressed as a professional athlete and was really making a living for myself by 17, I graduated from high school, and I knew that I was going to be going to college, like not going to university wasn't an option for me because it was never something that I saw my life not including. Well, I know that other people don't need to have a degree and they can be super successful. That was just a value that my parents instilled that was probably the most principal value that I still maintain throughout my life. I mean, I have so much still to learn and to discover with regards to education.
It sounds like your parents made the investment of time, money, and also, like you said, education in making sure that you had a great future ahead of you. And I think it's really important that, people consider and think about the idea of like the investments that you have to make in your children and education overall. And it sounds like it's become a really important part of your life. So can you talk a little bit more about, like you said, being 12 and going pro, and then, like you said, 17, you mentioned being the first time that you were actually able to support yourself. So let's talk about that time period of, first time that you became a pro climber to, earning in such a way that you were, like you said, able to support yourself, and, what role did your parents play there, and, how money kind of works in rock climbing.
Yeah, totally. As a climber, you essentially are making your principal income from endorsement deals. And endorsement deals range from small endemic climbing companies that may have smaller market budgets to mainstream large corporations that may be able to put a lot of finance behind campaigns or endorsement salaries. When I was 12, this was basically before the whole advent of social media. Social media has been a big changing factor in my sport, as well as, I believe, other action sports. But what you essentially did was you would do well in competitions and climb outside and be recognized by a magazine. And magazines were kind of like the principal way that the word about your career was let out to a more broader audience, and the way that companies could see your value as an athlete. And especially with younger kids, I think that companies are and should be careful with who they choose to partner with, because things can always change, especially when you're under 18. But I started appearing in magazines as kind of like this new and upcoming climber doing well. And I took this and my achievements, what was my resume, in competitions and outdoor pursuits, which were minimal at that time because I was mainly focusing on competition climbing, and essentially packaged them in a way that I would meet with companies. My first sponsor was a rock climbing shoe specific company called Mad Rock out of California. They saw the potential in me and agreed to create a little budget and provide me with free climbing shoes and chalk and kind of like the basic necessities of what, as a professional climber, you go through a lot of different climbing shoes, which are obviously expensive, and having someone provide that for you kind of minimizes a potential cost. But then as I started doing well in more competitions and started broadening my reach to more climbing outdoor pursuits, I started appearing more often in magazines, and companies would often come to me with the proposal of working together. And something that was maybe unique in my career was that my parents had absolutely no involvement in my endorsement conversations nor contracts. So once you're under 16 and 18, there's not too much you can do contractually to sign that's not going to be overseen because you're a minor. But since the climbing industry was pretty young at the time, there wasn't like too much specific legal work that we had to do. It was a lot of handshake deals, a lot of like email correspondence that I was probably corresponding over my AOL account or like AIM. Like I think I was like SD Climber 101 at AIM.com. Like, remember those days?
So if your parents weren't doing it, you said your parents were not in control of that. Who was the person that managed all that for you?
I was.
Like you were doing it on your own at 12.
Yeah, I always kind of felt like I want to be doing this and it's none of your business. And I would tell my dad, like, I don't ask you about your business, so why are you asking me about mine? And from a financial standpoint too, like, I didn't want them to know about my contracts or how much I was being offered monetarily, because I felt like, well, we don't talk about money and I don't ask you how much you make in a year, so why can you ask me? I kind of, I guess, put like this business front on, whereas I guess you could be the devil's advocate and be like, well, it's your parents, they have a right to know. But to this day, my mom still has, no clue what my contract deals look like. The only people at 18, I started working with an agent, and that was because things were getting more serious, and I think that contracts could actually be signed and have consequences and legal repercussions if they weren't followed through. And with more lucrative contracts, I think it's really good to have professional oversight and a lawyer. But yeah, it was kind of like the Wild West of, I never planned on being a professional climber. Like, that wasn't why I wanted to be with sponsors. I wanted to be working with companies at 12, at 14, whatever, because I enjoyed being recognized by them. I don't really think that I had an end game plan. It was more, if these endorsers want to get behind me and these companies support my image, then I'll be more recognized for what I'm doing, and I want my story to be out there. It wasn't anything really connected to monetary reasons.
That's so interesting that your parents weren't involved in the process, and like you said, being 12 years old and, or older. So you think that built an entrepreneurial spirit in you, and that the education that they were providing you gave you some extra tools to be able to negotiate these deals on your own until you got your first agent?
Totally. I think that one of the principal things that I learned from an early age, and I think that this is connected a lot with money not being this limiting factor, because I knew that if I wasn't perhaps provided the monetary amount from a sponsor, there was still support for me and my passion. And that was because I was a young kid who had the backing of my parents. But learning my worth at a young age and not settling for something that I don't agree with. And I think that that's become something that I carry on to negotiations that I like to be heavily involved with my agent now. I think that the main limiting factor in our lives is time, and time is invaluable. And if something isn't worth your time and you don't see it as something that connects with something that you believe in, then there's no monetary amount that can fulfill that need. I think that just building my own brand and seeing these pillars of what I stand for was a part of the entrepreneurial experiment that I was going through with creating what it is to be a professional climber, because I have so many inspirations in sports and in climbing specific as well, but I had no one that I was really looking up to as, this is the type of career I want as a professional climber. And I think that's because prior to my generation, professional climbing kind of meant making ends meet, living in a van, eating granola bars, like the reputation of being a dirtbag climber was that because it was fact. And I didn't see myself as fitting that mold, but I also saw myself as someone who wanted to climb for the rest of my life and make it my profession eventually. That's what I really saw as an option, but I didn't see it as something that was like my end goal. It was just everything kind of was this domino effect that as I started working with one company, then I started being more recognized by some other companies, and I would be reached out to, and then I would do something cool because I had the support of those companies kind of financing and backing my dreams of what I could pursue. And that made new doors open. So I think just like opening each new door with the curiosity and uncertainty of what it was going to be leading to, but just being aware of the fact that you need to say yes to new opportunities was really helpful and integral to my growth.
I really love what something you said about this idea of there's this stereotype of what a rock climber is. And you saw that, you felt like it was true. And then you said, I'm going to break out of that. I'm going to create a profession out of rock climbing. I'm not the stereotype. This will not continue to be the stereotype of the profession I want to create. I'm going to go out and figure out how to create monetary value for this thing that I do that I love. So I think that's awesome.
Totally. I think that it's we each have the capacity to create our own path. And that's what's so important and what I've learned through sports, because each of us represents something unique. And if you can really identify that, the earlier the better, but also the more genuine you remain to your values and where you see yourself, then I think that that's the necessary platform that you have to making it happen.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Let's talk a little bit about how you were managing the finances then, since you said you didn't have anyone involved. And if you do now, how it's different then versus now. But what were you doing to organize yourself, opening a bank account and deciding how much to save, or, were your parents still supporting you monetarily so you were able to save it all? How were you handling organizing your finances?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. At 18, when I graduated from high school, I had applied early to Columbia, and I knew that I was going to be paying for my university, and Columbia doesn't do merit-based scholarships. They do financial aid, and my family wasn't going to qualify for financial aid. So I paid out of my own income the full tuition of Columbia all 4 years. And I think that by that time, I was fortunately in a place that I could afford that without worrying too much. But during the year that I took off between high school and college, I used the money that I had to go and travel and live abroad and compete in the World Cup circuit. I won the World Championships in Arco, Italy that year. Then I went to over 30 different countries over the span of 14 months. The money that I had from sponsors was in my bank account, which I had opened when I was 17. But I could also write to them and say, hey, this is a trip proposal that I have. Will you support it? And fortunately, I had companies that were partnering with me and believing in the return investment of me going to, for instance, Southeast China. I went, and my flight and my accommodation and all of my travel was already covered. So there wasn't too much economic front that I was actually putting. So that enabled me to be saving and using my money for trips that weren't trip proposals that I'd gone through specific sponsors for. During that saving process, by the time I returned to go to university, I had money in my bank account that I could transfer funds for tuition and not have to go through any loans or anything like that, which I think is really key. In my opinion, it can be a really dicey situation if you get tied up in student loans. And unfortunately, that's a big issue that our country overall faces. Up until that point, I didn't have any sort of managerial person pointing out what I was saving, what I should be budgeting. But by the second year of university, I had a financial advisor. I work with this financial advisor still, who takes my income and invests it in a variety of different, investment opportunities so that I can be saving and preparing for when I don't have the income of a professional athlete and want to be still supporting myself if I'm kind of pursuing a job that isn't necessarily providing the same amount of financial income. But Columbia was, if education can be expensive and if you need to be paying for tuition itself, I shelled out over $250,000 on education, and that goes back to the values that I grew up with, and that was education is worth it. And some people see that and some people don't see that, and some people can't afford it, unfortunately. And that's where I think financial grants for those who can't afford going to university are so important. But I'm really thankful for when I told my sponsors, like, hey, I'm going to have to take a little bit of a backseat with my climbing career as I go to university and am a full-time student, I knew that it was going to be this balance of being a full-time athlete, but also a full-time student. But there wasn't any sort of option of not making it work because my job was what was putting me through school. But at the same time, I was choosing this other job, being a full-time student, which I think is pretty time demanding in of itself.
Yeah, I think it's really amazing that you were able to be as financially educated as you were in order to take a year off, be able to negotiate with people while you're taking this year off in between just high school and college and saving enough to be able to, like you said, fund that year off or to supplement the income of funding that year off. And then also know and do the research to know how much it's going to cost to attend this university for 4 years and set aside that money at a young age, 18, 19 years old. The question would be, did you make any mistakes during that time period? Was there something that you bought that you look back now and you shouldn't have? Or, did you get your first big paycheck and did your parents kind of have to step in and say, hey, you're not buying a new car or anything like that?
My parents still at that point and still now, my dad actually passed away just under 3 years ago, but my mom still doesn't have any sort of involvement in my financial situation either. But I think as far as mistakes, there are certain things that I spend a lot of money on, and that includes food. For one, like I buy premium ingredients. I will go out to eat because I'm often traveling, and that's like the opportunity for me to be social as well. And living in New York City is definitely not cheap. I had an apartment downtown because it made more sense for training, and my apartment was $3,500 a month. I mean, like, that's not that cheap for, I guess, like what you get in Manhattan, but it's kind of like the cost of living. I think that I still could improve a lot on budgeting and where I spend my money, but I see that money is kind of like, if you have the means to live and you want to do something, and let's say you want to go on your dream trip and you can afford to do it, there's no reason to try and bank up the money that you would otherwise set aside and not go on something that is inspiring to you. So I think as far as like mistakes, I could definitely be a little bit more cautious with where I spend money, and just in like the preparation phases of what is it, how much do I want to be saving, and do I really need the huge house that I want, or can I just get by with like living a little bit more simply? But my life is so full of these juxtapositions of like, I live in a 4-bedroom house in Boulder while simultaneously go out on camping trips where I'm living on the side of a mountain and probably traveling about like 300 days of the year versus the 2 months that I actually spend at home. So another juxtaposition is I'm super happy to live in a similar outfit for weeks at a time if I'm on a climbing trip, but I have an extensive collection of high heels and dresses that I love to wear, kind of like how we met each other at the Women's Sports Foundation events. And that's what's kind of cool about it, is just embracing the contrast that life has. I think that one thing that I've been really thankful for, amidst a lot, is my manager has helped me a lot with kind of organizing my schedule in the way that otherwise I would have this tendency to say yes to a lot of different things, and our schedules can fill up really rapidly and lose direction and this kind of sight about what it is that our end game goal is. And one of my, I think, mistakes that I'm thankful for looking back at is I've stretched myself really thin at times with just like saying yes to going to China for 14 hours and then returning to New York for class, and then 2 days later going to Germany and then returning to class. Like, my schedule through university was really hectic. I was probably traveling about Thursdays through Mondays and then in town to be there for class. And moreover was like the finance of my health. Like, what was I putting as the most important? And I think that I saw like grow my career, open new opportunities, expand myself as much as possible. But I have to be aware of like the expansion and growth that I want to see in my career, but also like the sustainability of it. And maybe that relates to business people who work really hard, so many hours, but at the end of the day, that extra amount of money that you're making, are you happy? And are you setting enough time aside to spend with family and friends and personal pursuits? And I think that that's something that I'm still learning about.
Yeah, I think you brought it up earlier. You were saying about the idea that, what is the investment of my time? Because that is the most valuable asset that I have. And, if this is not something that's really going to be worth my time, then this is not a worthwhile moment. And it seems like what you were just describing is kind of struggling with the idea of, feeling like you needed to be everywhere at once. And, that really did stretch your time thin in that time period where you said you were traveling and trying to go to school. You can't be two places at once. And so when we're thinking of time and thinking of investing, it's, investing in yourself. I like to use the term putting your oxygen mask on first. And that does mean, sometimes there's going to be a valuable opportunity that you have to pass up. And, it's just not the time period for that. But it will give you the strength and the energy, you staying home in order to be able to do something else that will be more valuable in the future. So
totally. I think one of my favorite principles that I learned in economics was the opportunity cost of time. And that can be stretched and played with in a multitude of ways. But I think it's something that I'm still learning about. And also just like as a professional athlete, your health is what's going to enable you to keep on progressing and just putting that first in the relationships that you cultivate. Like family and friends do take work and you need to be there for people. And if you're just consistently absent, then that can take a toll on those relationships. So just prioritizing as well. Like I think that as a friend, I could be more present for the relationships that I have. And I know that I'm kind of consistently absent. And it's kind of something that I'm trying to work on. And as we kind of move up in our careers and build whoever it is that we're becoming, I think like maintaining that grounding force of just putting the people in your life that you care about first is really important too.
Yeah, I definitely think it's important to build a strong team around you. And that reminds me of something else that you said earlier about being a sophomore and hiring a financial advisor to help you organize your finances. Can you tell a little bit about like how you went about hiring that person and what qualities and characteristics you were looking for to make sure that they were a good fit for you? What should someone be looking for in a financial advisor?
Yeah, I actually met my financial advisor. He's out of Morgan Stanley at a event with Athlete Quarterly, which is a magazine that I started going to these post-game events in New York City thanks to Cameron Myler, who is also a part of the Women's Sports Foundation. She kind of took me under her wing and introduced me to a lot of interesting people, including Drew Hawkins and people involved in the financial realm of sports and entertainment. We were at some dinner at STK, which is a steakhouse downtown, and I met who I work with now, and we were just talking about growing as an athlete, but also creating a cushion around your career. And I had just seen a documentary called Broke, and it was a 30 for 30 on ESPN's network, and it was about how a lot of NFL and NBA athletes specifically go broke after retirement because they've been taking care of a lot of people from their family or from their friends and taking up mortgages on houses, and all of a sudden they don't have that income that was steadily flowing before. And that kind of highlighted an important moment for me where I was like, I don't want that to happen to me, where I feel confused about how I can support myself when I go through this transition of not being an athlete and progressing into a different realm of what it is I want to do with my career. And hopefully that won't be this like big change in economics, but just in case there are years where I have to kind of grind it out, I want to have that cushion. So that was kind of like what prompted the conversation. And then I just started working with him, and he's been great. It's super easy to connect with and ask questions. Like I've invested as well in Bitcoin and Ethereum and Litecoin relatively recently, and that's kind of like something that I'm just experimenting with on my own. I watched like that documentary on Bitcoin and was interested about it and aware of the dangers of something being a bubble. Yeah, I guess that's like a tangent, but something else that's I've been interested in and just like trying out.
I think you bring up a good point, though, about the idea of, finding someone that is an expert in the area and then also educating yourself to make sure that you understand the areas that you're interested in. So you were interested in Bitcoin and you went to do more research in that area, but you found an expert to really help you organize and manage your finances. I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make, and even what that 30 for 30 broke was about, was people trying to do it on their own. Because we all earn a living, whether we earn $1 or $1 million, but not everyone is an expert at managing our finances. And we feel like because everybody earns money in some way and we don't have to hire a financial planner or someone to help you organize your finances, that, I should go ahead and do this on my own. It's cheaper, I can save money. But the investment in paying someone who is an expert in that area to help you so that you can continue to earn and grow in that area, I think is a really important point that you hit on there.
Yeah, totally. I think that it goes full circle back to representation, like your manager, your agent. That is a person that you are paying for, but if you can look at the return on investment with teaming up with someone who really knows what they're doing and can help you, then the whole theory is that you're bringing in more finances than you would have otherwise had on your own, so the cost is offset. And I believe so much in like just the partnerships that you build and the team of people that you surround yourself with, whether from a professional perspective or just from a life personal perspective. Sometimes if you're hiring someone, you really have to have confidence that it's worth it. And I think it's necessary to team up with the right people.
Yeah, for sure. Because making a mistake, and if you make an expensive enough mistake, you'll really regret not having paid someone on the front end. And it could have been a cheaper thing. So
yeah, I mean, I haven't had a clean track record of people that I've worked with. I mean, there have been changes in who's representing me, and that's been financially costing. But I've learned through the process too, and I'm really stoked on who my representation is now. But it's, just constantly this like process of learning and making errors and recognizing that that's going to happen.
Yeah, we learned so much from you today. Can we just go for one more second back to, I don't feel like we broke down enough rock climbing and like how you guys earn a living in rock climbing. So like you said, there's sponsorship opportunities, but do you like go to each, it's not a race, but each competition and there's prize money there? Is there like an appearance fee in addition to, and then the contracts from your individual sponsors, or how does that part work?
That's a good point. I can break down my income. What essentially happens is I was competing up until I was about 22 or 23 really regularly. And since then, I transitioned more into doing outdoor pursuits, so doing video projects around the world. The way that it happens is that competition climbing is not a very lucrative thing. Competitions, say the maximum amount that I ever got in a competition was $10K for winning. But on average, especially in the U.S., the competitors are earning about $2 to $3K if they win a competition. What's really supporting you is your endorsement deals, and that's kind of like the backbone of how a professional climber is making their living, and that's through salary contracts. So with a company like Adidas, which I've worked with since 2011, I have my salary contract that I earn X amount per year. And right now I'm in the midst of a 5-year contract that is a new turn of a contract since my original contract that I had. And then you have a bonus structure where you have incentives based on performance and media. Then on the other side, there's campaigns. So if you partner with a company and you do, let's say, a commercial with them, then it's kind of like a one-off fee where it's a talent fee that you're receiving for doing work days, which are filming and whatever it may include, and then often residuals. So if you're supporting the promotion of a product or something like that, then you ideally are getting a percentage of that sale. And then there is the advent of social media, which has created this whole other form of kind of channel of income, which if you decide to partner with a brand on a campaign, it may involve just like a social media post that is financially supported. I think that that can be a really slippery slope if you don't choose wisely, because as a professional climber, I have content that's interesting and attracts an audience where I can develop my own platform, but I have to stand by what my platform represents and what I think is relevant to my audience. So you won't see me posting out any sort of product that I don't actually use and believe in, because then it's kind of transferring this ingenuine message, no matter even if like that company was like, hey, we'll pay you this huge sum of money. I think that everything comes with a cost. So you have to choose really wisely about which companies you're actually promoting, but also any sort of conflicts, because what I protect a lot on my platform is how I'm representing my sponsors. And so I could never do anything with Under Armour per se or Nike, because my sponsor is Adidas, and that's the only product that I'm going to be wearing when I'm performing. So I think that there's different terrain like that in the endemic, like your role as an athlete. And then, of course, there's public speaking gigs, which I've become more involved with more recently since I've graduated from school and had some more time. And there's photo shoots that and appearance fees like signings that you have to do for your sponsors, which there's generally a built-in amount of time that of events that you have to actually go to and be a part of. So that's kind of like your role as an athlete is to be, as a professional rock climber, is to represent the companies that you partner with, be performing at a consistent level that is relevant to your sport. So whether it's achieving new first ascents, first female ascents, doing well in competitions, exploring new areas and staying relevant in the media, that's kind of all important on one side, but also speaking heavily about the brand and being able to serve as an ambassador is kind of part of your duty. So I think that one mistake that people, at least in climbing, make is, oh, I'm going to be paid because I climb really hard things or because I won a certain competition. And it's not the way that the industry works. The way that the industry works is that you are a personality and you represent a larger version of, you're essentially an extension of the brands that you work with. So just because you climb hard, but you can't speak well or you can't be approachable to people, then that's not really going to be any added value to a brand.
I think that's really an important point. It seems like you guys have multiple streams of income, but really your brand is the main stream of income. And that's what you're saying about having to protect the brand, really knowing what is good and what's not good. And then also making sure that you are developing yourself personally so that you can continue to represent brands and that they find value in you as a brand, as a personal brand. So that was really great information. Yeah, I think you've provided a lot for us today, and we've learned a lot about rock climbing, about you. So we're about ready to wrap it up. We just have a few rapid fire questions before we round it all out. It's not one word answers. It's just like kind of short and snappy, if you will. So
cool.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. You have $20 in your pocket right now. What do you spend it on?
Whole Foods prepared food because I'm hungry.
Most athletes say food. The best thing about being an athlete?
being able to live every day doing what I really am passionate about.
That is a really cool thing about being an athlete. Worst advice you've ever received?
Ooh, oh God. Don't go to university.
Oh my, someone told you not to go to college?
Oh yeah, when I was returning to college, I was like, there's so many people who were like, why are you going to college? You're like at the peak of your career. And I was like, because I want that peak to last for a long time.
All right, best advice you've ever received?
My dad always used to say, have fun, do your best, and be safe.
I think that's really good advice, yes. Just do your best. Most meaningful gift you've ever received?
When my mom sends me cards, I put them up on my fridge and I really appreciate them. My grandma also just recently sent me a package of just stickers and a card saying that she loves me, and that really touched my heart because I was like, oh, I used to always love playing with stickers and you thought about sending me some. That's so sweet. So I think, obviously I've received thoughtful gifts that I'm not remembering, but those are the most recent.
Yeah, for sure. All right. And last but not least, so at Worth Listening, one of our mottos is it's not about the numbers, but about the strategy. So I think sometimes people focus way too much on the amounts instead of the knowledge that's really needed to get the experience so that they can really experience any kind of growth. So with that said, our final question is, can you share with us one thing you would like to improve about your finances or your financial education in the upcoming year?
Absolutely. I would like to become better at time management and how I commit myself to obligations and things that I'm excited about, but know that maybe it's healthier to take some time to recharge and focus on the overall direction of where I want my career to go.
I think that's awesome. What's the action item to do that?
The action item, I keep a passion planner, which I recently got. And I think that knowing my goals and where I want to be in a year and just really selecting which different trips and opportunities will fit within that idea of how to achieve my goals.
Yeah, for sure. Being able to write it down and see it will help you delineate whether it's a good idea or bad idea. I think that's great.
Yeah. Writing things down is really crucial.
For sure. Sasha, thanks so much for coming on the show. Can you just tell us a little bit about what you're up to now, where we can find you, how we can support you?
Totally. Thank you so much for having me. I loved speaking with you. I'm such a big fan of your career and what you've done in sports, but also just transitioning professionally. I'm on social media at Sasha DiGiulian on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. And I just got back from climbing Mount Washington. Next trip I have is to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan to do some ice climbing. Otherwise, I reside in Boulder, Colorado.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you. I'll speak with you later.
Thank you for listening to Sasha DiGiulian's Money Memoir. One of the things I loved about Sasha's story was, though she is financially stable, she's able to live on the side of a mountain for days with only essential items. True financial freedom allows her to enjoy nice things that she can afford, but she doesn't need them. Her earnings are not attached to her happiness, and that is a great place to be. There's a pretty cool video of her sleeping on the side of a mountain that are in our show notes. Definitely worth watching. Our word of the day, return on investment, or ROI. Simply put, this is the profit that you make on an investment. You give up something in hopes of getting what you gave and more back in return. Sasha is receiving a return on many of the investments she made. Investment in education, the investment in a financial expert to help her make good decisions with her income, and the investment in rest, which requires saying no to some things so that she can rejuvenate herself and be her best at other things. This increases her earning potential. Don't be afraid to invest in yourself. Without making the investment, there's no way to achieve the return. Thank you for tuning in today. We hope you found this episode worth listening to. If you have financial questions, suggestions for guests, or would like to share your own money memoir, please contact us through our website, worth-winning.com.